It's wonderful to be with everyone, and thanks for the invitation. I was very thrilled when I got the invitation to come and talk about this, because it's a topic that I'm very passionate about and highly interested in really getting the opportunities to dialogue and think about ways in which we can implement core training in bioinformatics, exercise and outreach types of projects. So thank you for the invitation. And so I thought it would be a good starting point for me to talk a little bit about some of the back end that we probably have all seen in terms of how the historical context has played out. In terms of genomics, if we take a step back and think about the historical sort of timeline of events, we know that many of the fields in biological sciences have been around for a long, long time. However, I just want to focus for a moment in this particular region. So this region from about the 90s, the early 90s to where we are currently, this is really where bioinformatics emerged. And so as a field, in terms of the year of coverage, so to speak, or length of time that it's been around, it's certainly not on the same par with some of the other traditional fields, microbiology, genetics, etc. So all of this was bound to happen, right? We think about how the great revolutions occur. Generally, technological innovation drives this. In science, this is no different. And so I hope that by the end of my talk today, much of this will be illuminated. Again, some of this you probably already are aware of, but I thought it might be a brief starting point for us today. So my story begins really at the basic science level. And this is where I started out my career. And when I say basic science, here I'm referring to benchtop research, asking molecular questions, looking at mechanistic types of studies. For me, this was all in physiology, looking at molecular, cellular physiology, studying mechanisms. I was interested in a growth factor receptor. I spent much of my PhD work in this area. Most of these were in vitro studies, so studies done in mouse models or even in cell lines. And at that particular time, I was managing probably 12 samples per experimental run. So I would do my experiments, I would run my analysis and figure out from there, right? I've learned all of the steps in hypothesis testing. Later on in my career, things progressed, and then I needed to explore things at a genomic level. And here I was interested in altitude exposure. And with altitude exposure, we would be doing things like collecting whole blood samples. And so genomics had just come on board, and that was really a novelty for me at the time. And so I thought, oh, exploring microarray data, this is going to be where I need to be. This is what I need to be doing. And so there you can see my sample size certainly grew, right, from handling about 12 samples. So now I was handling about 20,000 samples at a time. So, and then things go on, things progress. And as time went on, I moved into a different stage in my career. And there I started looking at more high throughput sequencing projects. And at that particular time, there were a lot of really neat sequencing technologies that gave us that capability. We could sequence microbial organisms, we could sequence for human diseases, etc. And in terms of our data output, we were looking at probably about 100,000 to upwards of 1 million at that particular time. And again, for us, that was huge because we hadn't seen anything like this in terms of size of data. And so working on ways to manage the data, to analyze the data, to interpret the data, to visualize the data, were all parts of the challenges that we worked through. Now, things would yet again progress for me, moving onwards towards, new adventures in my career, onwards into specialized sequencing. And so with specialized sequencing, this really brought some of the more emerging technologies, right? Where key players like in the biotech world, like Illumina, et cetera, PacBio, Adaptive Biotechs, just to name a few, but there are potentially hundreds of them now. And so these specialized sequencing technologies gave us the capacity to have at any one time upwards of 5 million pieces of data to start combing through. So that's how my story sort of emerged. So in terms of the trend of how we've seen the technological advancement spur the scientific discovery, in essence, I've walked through those stages in my career as well. Now, undoubtedly, I'm sure, after looking at the timeline and looking at sort of some snapshots of my story, I've convinced you that the growth of data is a major driver in biology. Now, this image is dated, but even without knowing beyond this latter portion of the time here where we're given 2009, one could speculate that undoubtedly this has only continued to grow. So with the growth, with the opportunities, oftentimes also bring the challenges for us. And this is specifically not only for scientists, but for educators. And so I've broken the challenges into 3 sections, so to speak. So the first challenge is what I call defining the field for the audience. I'm going to tell you what I mean by that. The second challenge is fitting within the scope of a course or a department or a program or an institution. And then the third challenge is sustainability. And this is a challenge across research lab groups, research institutes, et cetera. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So I start up front with the challenges and then I end with the opportunities. So I do end on an optimistic note. So defining the field for the audience, what I mean by this is a couple of things. If you survey 10 scientists and you ask, what is bioinformatics? You may get probably 3 or 4 flavors of responses. And they wouldn't all be incorrect, right? Because this has been a question that has eluded even the very experts in bioinformatics. So at a sort of large scale overview, bioinformatics is thought of as this interdisciplinary field that develops methods or software tools for understanding biological data. Now, as an interdisciplinary field of science, bioinformatics does combine biology, computer science, information engineering, mathematics, statistics, all with the goal of analyzing and interpreting biological data. So it has a lot of well-loaded terms within that definition. And that's, I think, why you may get a flavor of varieties in terms of that question, what is bioinformatics? An interesting thing, so Dr. Gerstein published this is back in 2001, right? And they at the time were some of the very first players in the bioinformatics publication world and really trying to talk about this field, talk about what is this field, right? Talk about what to expect. And this publication was one of those that that when we saw it, we read it and we think we understood it, and then everybody goes back to doing their research, and then things progress. And it's not so much that we hashed it out, right? It wasn't necessarily that everyone figured out, oh yes, this is what I'm going to say bioinformatics is, right? And so this was a proposed definition, and it was sort of left at that. And I think part of that is what you're going to see is a flavor of how this is played out across institutions within the US. So a quick scan of institutions of courses taught that cover bioinformatics. So what are these courses called, right? And this varies. It's a huge difference in institutions and what they call these courses, whether they're West Coast, East Coast, North or South. And I think that's also interesting. We might have some discussions about that later on. In some institutions, they call it genomics and bioinformatics. Other places, big data and biology. Okay, here's another name for you, bioinformatics for biologists. And then there's another exciting one, bioinformatics for systems biology. And then there's the plain old bioinformatics, right? We call it plain, computational biology, which throws a wrinkle. Now it's thrown a wrinkle in bioinformatics. And then there's mathematical biology. Actually, this is what it was called at Ohio State. They had mathematical biology. And biomedical informatics, which yet again throws in another wrinkle there. And then nano-course in bioinformatics. This is what it was called at UT Southwestern when I was there teaching this. So lots of exciting names. Why so many different names? Why? What is it about all of these? That brings me to the second challenge, fitting within the scope of the landscape. Now, in order to fit within the scope of the landscape, we as scientists, we try to identify what are the uses, right? What is the use that I have for this particular area of expertise? And undoubtedly, this image, when I saw this in one of the publications, I felt that this really captured a lot of what I could have said in a verbal sentence, but it really captures it so nicely, because really bioinformatics can be used and applied for a lot of different things and is applied to a lot of different contexts. And I don't think that's something that is recognized across the boards of scientists, depending on which arena you may find yourself. Again, you'll get different flavors of perspectives on this, but really bioinformatics is very dispersed across all of the subdisciplines, which is yet again, perhaps one of the challenges that we are continually working against. So it could be from genes and genomes, all the way to chemical biology and then systems biology, which again, all have specific use cases that bioinformatics can serve. Now, if you think more specifically on the technical side, we know that bioinformatics can assist with things like applications and databases, information management, molecular biology is one of those, and then also computer-aided drug design. So a lot of pharmaceutical applications, and I'm sure, again, this is something that some of you may or may not have encountered. Now, there are misconceptions about bioinformatics, and this I think is something any of us in the field have probably come across, again, either within a cohort of individuals that may not be experts in the area, but have some working knowledge or worked with people in the area. And one of the things I point out to even students at my institution is, bioinformatics is not biostatistics. Just because they both start with the bio at the front, it's not biostatistics. And bioinformatics is also not programming, and so I always, I'm quick to point this out to students that may not be as aware, and even to fellow faculty members that may not be aware of these subtle differences that aren't so subtle once you do realize that it's a completely different field. But bioinformatics is a union of all of the skills acquired from knowledge within computer science, basic biology, and statistics. And I think this image to the right really nicely represents exactly what the goal of bioinformatics is all about. Now, you survey 100 freshman students, right? So I did this survey. I've done it now for probably the past 4 years. And I do it every year just to kind of see what the responses are like. but a survey of 100 freshman students, so first year in university, they're enrolled in a general biology course that has an added on portion where they cover bioinformatics during the last almost 2 weeks, the last 2 weeks of that 12-week course. And the students are all attending a primarily undergraduate institution. So the students are first asked, this first question, is it a valuable use of your time to study some fundamental concepts in computer science that may apply to computational analysis of biological data in the future? So a 1 indicates they strongly disagree with that particular statement, and a 5 denotes that they strongly agree. I'm not sure if you can see my pointer. I hope you can. I'm using my cursor. But as you could probably imagine, there is a huge portion of the students here that do agree that it would be a valuable use of their time. So that's very comforting, right? In terms of curriculum, in terms of how we think about implementing and at what stage we want to start implementing bioinformatics training or exercises so that they are able to articulate how this can be applied later on. So again, very, very comforting to see this. Now, the second question is, okay, tell me, if you had plenty of time, would you take a bioinformatics course outside of your major requirements just for fun, right? You're asking students to take a course outside of their requirements just for fun. And, I was pleasantly surprised because I can see that majority of the students, again, this is out of 86 students that responded to the survey, I can see that majority of the students do agree, that, taking this outside of major requirements just for fun, they would do it. Now, we have to dig deeper and kind of determine, from here, are there other considerations that they would have, such as timing of their studies, etc. But again, it was comforting to see that. And then a follow-up question that was posed was, okay, basic knowledge of command line style bioinformatics or computational biology is likely important for my future career, because we're keeping in mind that these students are thinking about, whatever their future career is going to be. And again, I think this was a really surprise element as well, which is that majority of the students do agree that even a basic level knowledge of just running things at the command line, that it may be important for their future career. This, I think, was a really remarkable finding, because I think for us, thinking about this, at least for me, I was thinking, oh, I'm not sure if the students are thinking that far ahead, because sometimes the students will come in as pre-med during the first year, and I've seen them probably by year 3 and they've switched to something else, right? They've decided that it's not for them. So we understand as educators that that is part of the process, is that they're in the university, they're being exposed to courses, and they may find interest in new areas they just did not realize they enjoyed. And they may decide to change to a different area or different plan, right? They were thinking of med school, now they're thinking of pharmacy school, or now they're thinking of PT school, or now they're thinking of grad school, which happens more times than I can count. So this, again, I think was a really interesting piece for me to discover along the way. So now I've shared with you some of those challenges in terms of identifying the audience. I want to touch on this for a brief moment, which is sustainability. Sustainability is something that we generally, as educators, we don't necessarily think about in terms of longer term sustainability, but I think there are some key pieces here that are worth noting. First is that when you're in a field like bioinformatics, the landscape is ever expanding. It continues to change because the data, if you think back to the image I shared when I was sharing my story, the data, the spread of the data had grown, and that was within a span of the past 20 years, right? And so even every year, we're continually learning more. And even now being in the midst of, the pandemic and coming out on the tail end of that, there's going to be a plethora of data. And so we're in this field that is ever expanding. And so with that expansion comes the need for us to always be at the cusp of making sure that we have pieces that can help us sustain whatever the programs are, whatever the parts of the curriculum are, whatever the courses are, whatever the training programs, summer opportunities, etc. So this affects all of us from the research side and also from the education side. Now, I'll share this schematic with you, and this has actually changed a bit, but they have yet to update this. This is all part of this is my reference here, and I think Dr. Pierce will share my slides with you all afterwards. This was submitted in Biomedical Computation Review. So at the time of publication, they hadn't updated the new numbers, but now this is much more updated. But this started out at 2004 on the left-hand side. In the pink is PhD programs. The green are master's level programs, and the orange are BS programs. And these are the number of bioinformatics degree granting programs in the United States over time. And the counts are of current programs, which were all compiled from a list maintained by ISCB, the International Society for Computational Biology and Bioinformatics. I can tell you that there are parts of this that aren't necessarily tipping upwards. And I'm going to tell you why that is. Sustainability, again, is a big issue for a lot of us. Again, many programs and many courses and special programs, summer, etc., aren't necessarily thinking about this. I think INBRE is an exception. When I worked as part of the INBRE scientific staff at University of Oklahoma, we were always thinking about sustainability because we were part of an INBRE award. But if you're an institution that may not have INBRE, here in Texas, we don't have INBRE. So sustainability may not necessarily be part of the considerations and part of that equation. So the things to think about is that longer term, how do we maintain these programs? How do we maintain that level of consistency? I was at a conference probably right before COVID, and I had two colleagues of mine lamenting because they were just on the tail end of shutting down their bioinformatics bachelor programs at their institutions. So I can tell you sustainability is affecting some institutions. Some are handling it better, but some of the smaller institutions, it has been problematic. Now, if we explain this to students, prospective students, just like when they're interested in careers, we say, why learn bioinformatics? We sometimes think about this in ways that I equate it to the way the Office of Admissions introduces students to a prospective university, tells them all of the wonderful things about the campus, how the university will support their training, and how the university will assist them with whatever they may need. And I think all of that is part of the process here. So why learn bioinformatics? This is all from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, sharing the current trends, and Bureau of Labor Statistics generally predicts for the decade. And so at the time when I was pulling this information together, it just compiles based on the field and the degrees that are expected. And the nice thing here is that you can see on the right-hand panel, I'm hoping my image is not hiding this, but let me know if you can't see it. Hopefully my image isn't distorting it in some way. But it gives you a nice set of percentages here. So you can see the bachelor's degree tends to be the most common one, followed by the master's, and then obviously the doctoral degrees, not as common there. Now here, I pulled this out specifically for the state of Texas. So I apologize, I probably should have added Arkansas in here. But at the time, I had actually shared this with a group of prospective students. And so this was something that I'd used to introduce how computational occupations were in light of current job openings and things like that, and what to expect. Another piece to this is thinking about the prospects for career. So moving further and thinking about career prospects, what they can expect. So the Future of Bioinformatics, this was taken from a study that had been done compiling trends from both the technical fields and also predicting market. So this was more of a business analytics focus. But here they talked about three particular trends, which I thought were really interesting, again, from an education perspective. At least three of the trends. So the first was integration of genomic information with electronic health records. And the second was personal genetic services. And then the third was population-based genetic data. And so I think those are really interesting trends. And then on the right-hand side is this image that just simply shows this anticipated growth. This was forecast starting at 2016 and going to 2025. But this growth that is again aided by recent advancements in proteomics and genomics, and how all of this will continue to be coupled alongside both government initiatives and IT developments. And so that creates a nice image that, again, as we think of sustainability and we think of ways in which we can communicate these and plan and make plans, I think this is a really good piece of data. Now, I go back to the student survey, and here these students, again, were asked specific questions. And so here, on a scale of 1 to 5, how would you rate this statement? I feel that some level of bioinformatics training will help me get a job or obtain graduate professional school admission after graduation. And so here we see that, again, using that same scale as previously, where the 1 denotes strongly disagreeing and the 5 denotes strongly agreeing. So here we can see that between the third piece of this bar and the fourth piece, generally the students feel that it will help them, which again, I think is a really comforting piece to see from the education perspective. And this lets us into some of the rationale that students may have when they're picking and choosing courses. And then the second question here, follow-up question is, mathematical skills are important for understanding biology. So here we can see basic level information where our students recognizing that mathematical skills are helpful for understanding biology. And I think this is really important because now we can see that students are making these connections, right? Again, these are first-year students. And we want to resurvey them as they're growing in their studies to determine how these changes track over time. But just at a glance, we can see that these students recognize that mathematical skills are also important for understanding biology. And sort of a follow-up question to that is computer science skills. So how do they rank computer science skills? And here, students also rank that computer science skills are important for understanding biology. So I think this piece of data are really telling us some interesting elements to how students are perceiving the overall purpose for doing these types of exercises. Now I'm going to pivot now to opportunities and implementation. I'm just checking my time to make sure I'm okay on time. But opportunities and implementation. So here we now know, or at least I hope it is now clear, and I think for many of you all that are in this field, undoubtedly this is clear, that big data has now met biology. So what happens when big data meets biology? So about several years ago, the NSF, National Science Foundation, funded a group of researchers that were interested in developing competencies for bioinformatics. So this organization, and I've been working with them now for some time, but we publish core competencies for undergraduate life science education. And so this has really been one of the driving forces to help articulate, what should the curriculum contain? How can we implement these in courses? And I know Dr. Pierce and I were having a quick chat at the beginning about these types of ongoing issues and how we can remedy these. And so the core competencies were a nice starting point. And so the network for integrating bioinformatics into life sciences education, or what we call NIBLS, was one of those. And so I started work with NIBLS shortly after that publication was done. And so we have follow-up publications from a sustainability aspect. But NIBLS identified bioinformatics competencies that were essential. And when we say essential, in terms of what are the minimum skills, and this is something that we were chatting about at the beginning of the talk, is that there are, at a bare minimum, these skills are what every undergraduate student should have in their toolkit prior to going into the workforce or a graduate program, etc. And so I think this is an area that creates a lot of opportunities, and it's very flexible. That's the other thing I like about the core competencies, is that these are competencies that can be implemented into specific courses. As part of courses, it can be merged, and it can be applied in multiple ways. And so the core competencies are what you see here. All of these are available again at the link that I'll be sure to share with you after the talk as well. But firstly, the role of bioinformatics, and then computational concepts, statistical concepts, introduction to basic tools, how to retrieve data, how to do some basic scripting, modeling aspects, what are data types, other implications. So each of these areas for the core competency has really given us the capability now, I think, as educators, to find ways that we can implement. And the other nice thing is that the NIBLS community has also gone through tremendous effort, again, through the funding that was provided to us, but to collect and customize and also share high quality learning resources. And these learning resources, I think, are by and large one of the most useful that's out there for bioinformatics education. The good thing about these types of resources is that these are curated. So these are primary level curation, where individuals that are part of the review committee will look over the exercises, look over all aspects of it, and also make revisions, and also ask the authors to add any revisions and make it clearer, or tweak it, whatever ways they can to make it work for the users. And many of these are already being utilized, and you can see the uses, you can see how many downloads, and you can try them out, and these are freely available. I love it because, again, as an educator, having tools available that you can use that are ready-made and that you don't have to put pieces together yourself, that was the goal for this NIBLS resource, and it's continually growing. We call this part of the faculty incubator because we want faculty to have the resources that make things easier for them to disseminate to the students, and also resources that have been tested so that they know it works and it's very easy to use. Now, basic course content examples. I just created a list of this in terms of what tends to get covered in courses. Again, this is going to vary. For example, there were many years where I taught bioinformatics as a piece of a genomics course. And then now, about 3 years ago, I developed my own bioinformatics course at my university. And so there are ways that this can be implemented. Implementation at the general biology level is another way that I've seen it done. And even implementation at a summer level. So for summer high school outreach programs or summer research programs. And so I think there are lots of ways in which I've seen this type of course implementation. The basic list of types of contents, again, these can all be modified, whether it's basic sequence analysis, multiple sequence alignments, methodology, basic programming exercises, bioinformatics in society, applications to human disease or environmental projects, things like that, are all ways in which these can be implemented. Now, the final piece that I'm going to leave you with today in terms of implementation are the role for open source tools and data sets. I think by and large, the open source revolution has been really good. I call it a blessing to the field of bioinformatics. I know I have been at conferences where there may be arguments about, what is the carrot to deposit my data set and make it open, and so I do think as a field, we have adopted that early on. Much more than in other fields of biological sciences. I think it's always been that we felt that we needed to make those open source so that it's available for the community. I think that's another part that's unique about bioinformatics. And so the open source, you'll see it play out in many ways. Galaxy, whether it's omics community, whether it's the Jupyter Lab project, amazing work that they've done, NCBI, UMBL, and RStudio. There's so many of them that I've just, put just a snippet, but one could imagine hundreds of those open source tools available. And now we know, this is now, again, this is dated, right? But this was back in 2014, which is, again, just to give us a flavor of how things have grown and sort of spurred out. But we knew back then big data was pouring out of life sciences, creating opportunities for scientists. I think now we're at that cusp of making sure that all of these challenges are met with the right solutions. And I think that's, once we bridge that, I think that's going to be our happy medium. And so this quote I like, bioinformatics turns something unfathomable into something we can visualize. That's the goal. Ultimately, something that we can visualize, or understanding what the story is, I think is the goal for these types of course implementations, programs, etc. And so with that, I want to thank you all and happily take any questions you have at this time.